Hello and welcome to the Farmer's Guide podcast. I'm Daniel Hodge, machinery reporter here at Farmer's Guide, and I'm joined by...
Hi, I'm Sarah Kidby, livestock editor and deputy editor at Farmer's Guide. We're glad to have you with us wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's the tractor cab, the farm office, or nowhere near a farm.
In today's episode, Diversifying Your Farm, we're going to be exploring ways that farmers are branching out into new and different ventures. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Larking Gowen, and a big thanks to them for supporting the podcast.
We've chosen to talk about farm diversification for our first podcast, and the reason for that is, as we know, farming incomes are under increasing pressure, and we've seen some particularly difficult government policy as well as price rises and weather pressures over the last sort of 6 months to a year in particular. And most recently, we've seen the spending review, and it looks like we're going to lose 100 million from the farming and countryside programmes, and we've also seen much more significant cuts to the de-linked payments than we were expecting.
And with all of these schemes shifting and commodity prices swinging, many farmers are actually struggling to even break even from their traditional crops or livestock. So diversifying, whether it's renewable energy, storage, or whatever form it takes, has the potential to provide a vital boost to keep a farm viable. Today, we're going to have a little bit of a dive into 3 great examples of diversification and some expert advice if you're considering it yourself.
We've got some great interviews coming up. We'll hear from a massive solar energy project in Oxfordshire. We'll take a look at converting old barns into self-storage units, which is becoming increasingly popular. And we'll also hear from one farmer about his personal journey into glamping and farm retail.
So to begin with, let's have a little look at renewable energy as a path for diversification. So as Sarah mentioned, in Oxfordshire, there's this big project, which I'm sure you've heard of, called the Botley West solar farm. And it really is huge. It's about 1,400 hectares of solar panels that have the potential to generate enough electricity for 330,000 homes. And if it is approved, it's going to be one of the largest solar farms in Europe.
And it's largely being built on farmland, is that right?
Yes, it is going to be built on farmland. The majority will be on farmland, and local farmers are leasing out portions of their land for this project.
And as we know, there's a lot of controversy around losing productive farmland.
Definitely, yeah. There's local residents and farming voices who are worried about losing green fields, losing the beautiful landscape, and for the loss of productive farmland. However, the farmers themselves who are involved are on board and are interested because it's going to offer them financial stability that otherwise they might not have, and they hope that they can continue farming in some form on or around the panels.
To learn more about Botley West and how it involves farmers, Daniel spoke with one of the project's directors, Mark Owen-Lloyd of Photovolt development.
Could you briefly explain what the Botley West project is and perhaps what it aims to achieve?
Yeah, sure. So it's a total of 1,400 hectares utility scale solar farm, which will generate 840 megawatts. It's connecting to the national grid at a brand new substation, which is being built for us and 4 other customers at Farmore to the west of Oxford. So Botley West, should it be consented, we're about a year away from a consent decision from the Secretary of State for ESNZ. Should it be consented, it will take about 2 years to build, so should connect in late 2028, early 29. So we'll just get in to contribute to the 2030 government targets for 48 gigawatts of solar. If we are consented and built, we will be able to provide enough electricity for 330,000 homes in Oxfordshire annually.
What has your experience been working directly with farmers on the project?
Well, as you'd probably expect, particularly in the current climate, when ground-mounted solar it really is the technology of choice because it's the cheapest and easiest to deploy. Offshore wind is very expensive. You have tricky crown leases to negotiate and very high equipment costs. Cost of solar panels is still falling and the efficiency is rising. Farmers are actually the easiest stakeholder that we have to deal with because they are businessmen They're under pressure from fluctuating prices, from volatile weather, and a solar developer comes along and says, well, I will pay you a quarterly rent check linked to inflation and with a turnover uplift, and you'll have a conversation with them. All I would say about farmers is they're very careful about whom they deal with, because many developers will come to them and promise them, oh, I'll have consent for a 50 megawatt scheme within 18 months. And most farmers know that's probably not true.
Can the land itself that the solar panels are on, can that still be used in a productive way for farming at all, for livestock or anything like that?
Yeah, so when we first did our biodiversity net gain plan for Botley West, which was promising to deliver a minimum 70% biodiversity net gain, we were anticipating having small areas of sheep on the fringes, because we've got about 500, just under 500 hectares where we have no panels, so over 1,000 acres of panel free. And we were going to have, obviously we've got wildflowers and areas which will attract birds and insects and bees particularly. But the biodiversity designer said it would be really helpful if we grazed the whole site. So the panel wiring now will be done in such a way that sheep will be able to go on the whole site. So we're going to have sheep on the whole installation, both in panel areas and non-panel. And obviously one of the advantages of that is not having to go in and keep the sward down, because the sheep will be doing that. And we've got 3 or 4 grazers who want to come and put their sheep on our land. So we're very excited about that. And for those who have to look at our fields, for our neighbours, that will help them see that there is agriculture continuing. So they'll see our panels in the fields, obviously, but they'll also see sheep in amongst them, and the farmer delivering and collecting sheep and all the usual agricultural activities.
So is this one of the points that you would make to a potential criticism that there's loss of productive agricultural land?
Yeah, I mean, it's an argument that's thrown at us by our opposition, and it's also thrown bizarrely by MPs and those that should know better at a national level. And it's just not an argument that stands up. And if the government's going to, or if we're going to deploy on behalf of the government 78 gigawatts of solar by 2035, so that's an increase of about 60 gigawatts on what we have now, that will use less than 1% of the UK's productive farmland. So it's not a significant number in terms of food production, particularly when you look at over 10% of UK farmland is in environmental initiatives where the government pays farmers to not grow food.
So do you think that the majority of criticism that you receive comes from within the farming community or outside of it?
No, it's what the National Farmers Union is described as people who are peri-urban. So these are basically urban people who have quite understandably either retired or for lifestyle reasons moved to very beautiful villages for the quiet and the calm that these villages represent to them, which ignores the fact that these are villages at the heart of working communities. The countryside works really hard. It is industrialized in many ways. It just doesn't look it because it's got hedges and tractors and livestock. So I think those are the people who will come to realise that actually change, while it's not what they moved to the country for, is not nearly as bad as they fear. But those are the people really who oppose us. It's quite a tight demographic, both age-wise and kind of income-wise, social group-wise. Farmers are probably the most open-minded of any people in the countryside. They've all got, I mean, for example, our farmer in our southern section, who he's given us nearly half his farm, he was making his income. The farm wasn't paying him an income. He was making his income from, rural related things. He had a couple of Airbnb properties, he had a yurt, and he had a shepherd's hut. So that's what pays his bills. But of course, what he loves to do is sit in his tractor. So they realise that, they can get a cheque from us, still sit in their tractor. It's not destroying the countryside. As Blenheim said, if we could put our 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres that we've given you, we could put polytunnels on it if we wanted. It's entirely permissible. So, most farmers have a very open mind about this, particularly if it allows them to keep on farming, because that's what they want to do, is farm. They don't want to. They want to do other things. They don't want to be property landlords who turn their whole farm over to business units. They want to keep farming, and that's their passion.
So, what do you think, Sarah?
I think it's a difficult one. I think none of us wants to see food security go down. We've got 60% of our food that we consume is produced in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to see that figure go down anymore. And I think there's obviously rightly concern about the number of solar panel projects that we're seeing. And there's obviously always questions over the productivity of the land. We want to make sure that these projects are done in the right way.
Yeah.
Equally, we need farms to make money, and we don't want to lose our farms. And it kind of brings up the broader issue, doesn't it, that food production isn't profitable currently.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the statistics that Mark did quote was that to meet the government target of the amount of solar to be produced, that would use up 1% of farmland.
Yeah.
Do you think that's accurate?
I think it's hard to say. I guess our perceptions can be skewed because we see the large number of projects coming through, and it can very easily feel like quite overwhelming. And then putting it into perspective in a statistic like that, I guess makes it a little bit less concerning.
Because 1% doesn't sound like a lot, does it?
Yeah.
And actually, something else that he said to me, that around 10% of land is in in environmental schemes.
Yeah.
That's then not being used as productive agricultural land, potentially. So I thought it was interesting that 1% got brought up, but then also that the farmer that you mentioned that is now able to farm, he'd given up 40% of his farm for solar. So 1% overall, but could be a lot more for an individual farmer who's looking at doing it. So that's quite a substantial, part of their land, obviously.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult. It's hard to see how between environmental schemes and solar panel projects, it is hard to see how we're not going to lose, domestic food production, that's not going to reduce. And that is obviously concerning.
Yeah, I thought that the point that you made about how that farmer in particular, again, was now able to do what he loved doing was quite compelling.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I think that anything that keeps farmers farming, in theory, is a great thing. I guess it's just maybe keeping, making sure that we don't lose any of our food security at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, so should we move on to the next segment?
Yes. Now, switching gears to another form of diversification that's been gaining popularity, we're seeing increasing numbers of self-storage units. So all those unused barns or big sheds on farms, they might be potential gold mines for storage.
And I think in principle, it makes quite a lot of sense in that over the country, there's probably a lot of farm buildings and empty spaces that aren't being used. And therefore, if a farmer is able to reutilise that space and is able to make a bit of extra cash out of something that's not being used, then that makes quite a lot of sense and seems like it might be a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. We wanted to find out just how farmers can get into the self-storage game and why it's proving to be such a popular trend. So Daniel spoke with Martin Fletcher from Kuboid, a company that specialises in building and fitting out self-storage facilities, including on farms.
Why do you think self-storage has become such a popular form of diversification amongst farmers, and what are the benefits?
Well, firstly, I think that self-storage is easy to set up, and really has a cost versus return model that's highly favourable. And that they also, they've got the space. Farmers have got the buildings already. They don't need to worry about trying to source a building and have the cost of all that. So in terms of actually just setting up with existing properties that they've got, it's definitely a great viable option.
How would a farmer go about setting up a self-storage unit?
Well, the first thing would be to contact and discuss with a specialist self-storage fit-out company such as Kuboid. From there, we advise on the space that they have, how much space can be utilised for storage, the potential returns. We can visit site and take measurements. Our in-house design team will be able to build a design showing the storage layout, which gives details on the yield on the space that they can have, because you do lose a bit of space to corridors and accesses and fire exits and things like that. But ultimately, just to get a gauge of how much the sort of return they're going to get on the space that they've got is key to decide whether they're actually going to go. It's worth sort of going ahead with or not. But any size building can be utilised for self storage. It's just a case of whether it's going to stack up on the returns.
What types of buildings are suitable for self storage?
Self storage the product itself is very adaptable and can fit most building types. Most sort of self storage buildings you find are kind of the warehouse style, or in a farmer's situation, sort of farm barns and things like that. The customer experience is paramount, so you've got to consider sort of cladding or roofing, the condition of the sort of barn itself. But that's all things that we can go through when we do surveys and sort of consult with the farmer. As long as it's a good sound structure, we tend to be able to work with most situations.
What ongoing maintenance is required by the farmer once the building's in place?
Once in place, it's actually very little. So sort of occasional cleaning, hoovering of the hallways, just making things are nice for the end user. I mean, nowadays with the technology where it is, a lot of people are looking at being unstaffed. So with automated latches and access control solutions, people can gain entry without having to have people on site. So this is brilliant for farmers who still want to run their existing farming business and have the self-storage kind of on the side, so to speak.
So on average, how quick is the return on investment for the farmer, and roughly what kind of revenue can they expect from this?
Yeah, we tend to kind of provide typically a return on investment is around sort of 18 months to 2 years. Depending on the size of the facility, of course. The smaller the facility tends to fill up a little bit quicker. Larger facilities take slightly a bit longer. But ultimately, it is really down to how quickly you can fill those storage rooms in relation to what the return's going to be. But it is relatively quick when you compare other return models in various other industries and things. The SSA UK, the Self Storage Association in the UK, advised on their recent annual report that the national average price per square foot was £29.13p per square foot. That's a national average. So if you're in a rural situation, you're probably going to be a little bit under that, sort of £22-24, something around that mark. So for example, if a farmer's got a building that's 10,000 square foot, minus the space that we need for corridors, accesses, fire exits, that kind of thing, it's normally around about a 70% yield on space. So 70% of that space can be used as chargeable storage space. So sort of £22-24 times 7,000, it gives a really good return, and for what is really quite a small investment in the first place.
Does self-storage pose a risk to food production on farm, or is it something that's going to tie in fairly well with farming?
Oh, it definitely ties in well with farming. Like we've said already, that farmers do have space and buildings ready to convert to self-storage, so they're already ahead of the curve in that respect. But where it comes to the concerns about things like food production, etc., self-storage can be run in tandem with existing businesses, because self-storage is kind of runs itself and you can be relatively unstaffed. You can generate a passive regular income to sort of bolster the ever-changing reductions in farm earnings through regulations and everything else. So ultimately it does provide a backup income to help with that.
Thanks again to Martin from Kuboid for giving us answers to our questions there. I think there are some interesting points to consider if you're looking at getting into the self-storage game yourself. So, now we've had a look at solar energy and self-storage, which are both pretty large or technical projects. For our final kind of farmer segment, we're going to bring it down to the personal level and speak to a farmer himself.
Diversification isn't just about businesses and infrastructure, it's about people finding creative ways to keep their farms running. One of those people is Ben Aveling, a mixed farmer from Northamptonshire.
So you've spoken to Ben, haven't you?
Yes. So Ben, his farming business, he has about 200 acres of arable land. He also keeps sheep, goats and pigs and fattens beef. His diversification journey started about 20 years ago with a farm shop in Cambridgeshire city centre, and he was selling meat from their large pig farm at the time, among other produce, and they also started doing the butchery on farm as well. The shop closed in 2023 as sadly the footfall fell after COVID, which I'm sure a lot of people have experienced. But they've set up an online shop to plug this gap, and they now deliver meats nationwide straight from the farm. They also bought a local pub, and Ben says his experience had much in common with Jeremy Clarkson's recent experience of pub ownership. So to help spread the risk, they also have a glamping business.
Sounds like he's being very busy.
Yes, he's tried a lot of different things.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the fact that obviously farmers are increasingly having to diversify, with farm profits not being where they should be necessarily? How do you feel about that?
Well, it's deeply saddening. First and foremost, I mean, I think the whole situation of farming is quite, it's its own negative vibe, really, isn't it? It's kind of surrounded by a real narrative of doom and gloom, and you're also told that you have to diversify, and sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. And I think that there's a lot about diversification that I don't like, and that if I could change, I would. So I would say that, if farmers are being told they should diversify, in my opinion, it probably is more often than not by someone who has never diversified before. So it's a very difficult one to get the point across, and don't really know until you've done it. But I think it's one of those things where to be prepared for actually how much it impacts your day-to-day business. That's a big thing.
Is there any advice that you would give to farmers if they were thinking about starting a diversification for the first time?
Yeah, well, my opinion would be to really think about it and to really see what value it will bring to your business. Because it will always take a lot more time out of what you do than you think. And so, for example, if I could have to get the sheep in, for example, to do their feet or to treat them or worm them or something like that. And you not only have to be cautious because our customers who come glamping, for example, are near those sheep fields. You've also could be suddenly called out because they've got a leak or there's a problem, or people don't. If there's an issue, people are also quite happy to complain, and we have Airbnb, and you can get negative reviews, and it can really impact your rating. And I would say dealing with the public, if it's for the first time, it is a real learning curve, and it will take up a lot more time than you ever think. And it will. And what happens is because you have to be reactive because it's a customer-based business system suddenly, isn't it? If you're selling meats like I am, or you're doing glamping, it's suddenly customer-based. It's not like the farm. So the farm ends up having to go to the bottom of the pile in the task list. So, today I might have someone call up saying there's a problem. I was going to go and do the worming, but the sheep will just have to wait. And that's how it goes. And at harvest time or haymaking time and things like this, you have a very real time pressure. But if you have to, get your orders out for a certain day because people have ordered them, you've got to do that first. Yeah. So the irony is to try and make your farm survive, you're putting it last. That's probably the whole conversation in a nutshell, and that I find that very difficult. And that's why over time you get used to it, and we've got systems in place. But especially at first, it's hard, and it probably needs more of you than you think. And so, I mean, that it's just really think about it and does it. But something I really think about as well when it comes to diversification is I think you have to actually pick something that you like. So that's, I think, gives you more opportunity of getting it done and getting on with it, because it's going to be applied to your business for a long time. So you have to like it. So when I chose the website and the social media and making videos, I mean, that was a diversification choice, and I actually quite enjoy those. I quite like the technology side of things. I quite like making videos, and I quite like talking to customers. That's always been my favourite part of it. I mean, my least favourite part is actually making the stuff. I like the farming and I like the chat, but I don't like they say, the butchery, the packing, and the cleaning, and all the, do you know what I mean? All the middle stuff. So, you know, it's about making sure you do something that you enjoy. So if you're a farmer thinking about diversifying, if you think you'd enjoy what's going to happen, then I think that will make it so it's a success. If you're doing something you already hate and you haven't even started it yet, you know, if you go, I can't stand the public, or I don't want to have a lot on my farm, or I can't think of anything worse than, you know, having a butchery or a website, then you've really got to think about either outsourcing the role or getting people in to help you, but then that comes at a massive cost. So one of the things that we did a long time ago, maybe even years ago now, is we actually completely got rid of as many people as we could out from staff and tried to do as much as we could ourselves, because that would be another massive for diversifying. Is if you can afford to do, if you can afford staff, that's one thing, but if you're not sure if you can afford staff, then don't get them to do it yourself until you know you can. But the issue is you know, the problem is staff never do it like you do, and you end up in this whole sort of cycle. That was something that happened with the shop. I thought by replacing myself in our shop over time that it would stay the same, but actually you don't realise in a face-to-face business, for example, like a shop on your farm or whatever, people are actually coming to see you. And if they are not there 2-3 times in a row, they might just stop coming. If I could choose, like you're saying, what diversification kind of thing could I do? I'd love to be able to sell personally just about everything that we produce.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of I love that goal. So if we produce oats, I'd love to sell packaged oats. If we produce milling wheat, I'd love to, you know, have a form of, I don't know, cracked wheat cereal. And if we do straw, I'd love to sell little straw bales for garden centres. And the list goes on. That's the kind of thing I sort of, for me, the ultimate goal would be to have like little pocket businesses or like a little warehouse with all our stuff in it that we're just selling all the time. And for me, if I could pick what I did, it would be selling whatever we have and having everyone else making the stuff, because that's actually where I am. I'm least skilled at creating, like, you know, doing the day-to-day stuff. I'm much better at, if you put me in a room of people to sell my product, I'm quite comfortable doing that. But when you're on a farm, it's quite difficult because I could be littering the cattle and mucking out the pigs, and I've got to change my boots, clothes, and jump into butchery and pack boxes, and then I've got to go and make sure I'm not covered in dirt to go and change the bed in the glamping bit, and that's really difficult. So they would all work a lot better if they were independently run by a member of staff or whatever, and everyone did their own thing. But at the minute, we're just one-man band territory. But so really my goal would be to grow enough that you could have people to do the work that I'm no good at and it doesn't make sense that I do. It's stuff that isn't necessarily specialist that anyone could do. In fact, anyone can put meat into a bag and put the pack down and seal it. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's not. Yeah. I'm doing stuff that anyone could do. It's just we're not in a financial position to be hiring those people yet. But my ultimate goal would be to get it so we can get through to my children are old enough so they can decide what they want to do, and then we'll see there. Really, that's my medium to short term goals. But my middle son Leo is obsessed with the farm, and he's got loads of ideas that he wants to do. So, you know, he's only 9, but that's not that long away. 10 years, is it? Before he's old enough to be part of the working farm. So we've got 10 years to think about how he wants to do. And so a lot of the diversification projects are sort of geared towards that as well. And we've got nieces and nephews who might be interested as well. So, you know, I'm always trying to think of the family, really.
Well, Ben sounds like a nice guy.
Yeah, really great guy. And I think his experience really underlines how creative farmers can be. And I think it was nice to hear, you know, it's a very honest view of diversification, and I think really shows the challenges that farmers face, especially with doing non-farming jobs like changing beds and things like that, that isn't part of a farmer's job generally. But But also, you know, the businesses that he's diversified into have allowed him to put money back into his farming business and to build up his livestock as well, which is great.
Yeah, so by diversifying, he's helping secure the farm's future and, you know, his family's future with that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what I got the impression really motivates him, that he wants to build something for his family, his son, to take on one day.
Yeah. I mean, do you think diversification seems to be becoming necessary for farms to continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Ben said, it's quite sad in a way that we're in this position because really food should be valued to the point that farmers are profitable and they don't actually have to find other ways to get revenue. But equally, that is kind of where we are.
It's the reality of the situation.
It's the reality,
yeah.
And although I think what we need to see is change in terms of that profitability, but it's always a really tricky balance, isn't it? Because food needs to be affordable, especially now, and then also farmers need to get fair profits for the produce, and I think perhaps we need to see some change at government level and retailer level for that. But in the meantime, I think it's great to see farmers being so creative.
Yeah. And if any one of our listeners has any views on this, do feel free to email us at podcasts@farmersguide.co.uk, and please do let us know what you think, because obviously it's a potentially controversial topic, but it's very relevant, and like we say, it's kind of the reality of the way farming seems to be going at the moment. But yeah, before we wrap up, we have one more segment for us to listen to, and that's going to be a segment from our sponsors, Larking Gowen, who are going to be talking to us about some top considerations when you're diversifying. So here's Sarah with Bruce Masson.
Okay, so what are your top tips for farmers who are thinking of diversifying?
Thank you, Sarah. Diversification has obviously been, one of sort of the buzzwords, particularly around, farming business, for 20 years or more. I think, particularly in this century, businesses have been told that they obviously need to, diversify their income streams, largely due to the sort of volatility of farming income. And as with any other business that you are starting off, it is a case of preparation and thoughts. And it's an oft-used expression within any business sphere, but fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Now, diversification takes on many forms. Just this morning, I was actually out at a farm business that their diversification project is health and well-being. So completely sort of a lot of farms obviously do things like swimming pools and that sort of thing, and this particular client has done both swimming pools, and they've added on a wellness centre as well. And the reason I bring up that example is it's a great example of where a passion of one of the existing farming partners, who is very passionate about agriculture, is also in that particular sphere. And I think that's one of the key things about diversification. In order to to make a real go of it, is that you've got to have either a deep-seated passion for something to start with, or be an incredibly good business brain in which to happen. It's very, very difficult to get any of these projects off the ground. And so my sort of, absolutely, preparation is the key. A well thought out and fully funded business plan is an absolute must. So that starts off with, looking at all the financials, of which, you look at, get your accountant to help, look at it, talking to banks about the possibility. But even before that, you are probably looking at things like, doing market research into what it is you're doing. Obviously, we're in the eastern region here, so if we're looking at North Norfolk and particularly down the east coast, things like furnished holiday lets have always been, one of the big sort of go-to areas. And so farmers with either existing houses or property that they can develop for that sort of real rural feeling of either that or a glamping spot or something like that. You've really got to think about it, and it's not just the the things about construction and how it's going to work. The market research takes in all sorts of things. So you've got to speak with lettings agents, people who are actually really involved with the business to find out what is the appetite for these sorts of things. Am I going to be the first person doing this type of thing, or am I joining a long line of people who are doing it? Is it a hard market to crack? All those sort of things. And I think once you've actually sort of gone over those hurdles, both from a sort of regulatory, legal, marketing, research point of view, you then really have to look, very hard at the numbers. And, secondly, like, am I going to have to employ somebody, to do all of this? Because, with, recent, changes, particularly in national living wage and national insurance, it's another layer of cost about a project that, if you're already operating, potentially on tight margins, how is your time best spent, to do these things? As a farmer, you're already juggling probably quite a number of balls in terms of, what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. Are you just throwing another ball that you can't juggle into the air?
Okay, so to wrap up, today we've heard about 3 different ways of diversifying a farm, from hosting one of the UK's largest solar projects to turning barns into a storage business, to creating glamping getaways and farm shops and butcheries and all sorts. But really what comes from that, I think, is that it's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Every farm is different, every situation is different, and consequently what you are able to do or what is best for you is going to be different.
I think there are endless opportunities really for diversification. There are so many different things you can do. Equally, diversification might not be for everybody, and it's about making it work for your business. But it was great to hear from the farmers and experts today, and the way that they think about how to use resources, whether it's land, building, skills, and just ask the question about what can you do to stay resilient and build a business for the future.
Yes, and a big thank you again to our guests for sharing their insights. That's Mark Owen-Lloyd from Photovolt Development Partners, Martin Fletcher from Kuboid, and of course, Ben Aveling.
I would also like to thank our sponsor again, Larking Gowen, for supporting this episode. We're really grateful to have them on board, helping us highlight these important topics and providing advice.
So, if you've enjoyed this episode or it got you thinking, please let us know. We'd love to hear your feedback or your own diversification stories. You can email us at podcasts@farmersguide.co.uk or reach out on any of our social media channels.
And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the Farmer's Guide podcast and leave us a review or rating. It really helps more people to find the show.
We'll be back soon again with more conversations and updates from the world of farming. Until next time, take care and happy farming.
Bye for now.